Hey everyone, UFC 305 is in the books, and it was quite a show. It was a fun show in Perth, Australia. In the main event, middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis retains his title with a fourth-round submission victory over Israel Adesanya. A terrific fight, a really good back-and-forth fight. Adesanya looked great in his first fight in nearly a year after losing to Sean Strickland last year. Du Plessis I thought was fantastic because I thought he was about to get knocked out, and he comes back and he submits Israel Adesanya with a rear naked choke. We will get into that a little bit later. We'll also talk about the star-making turn, I thought, of Carlos Prates, who had a knockout of Li Jingliang on the main card. That was quite an impressive performance. We will get into that a little bit in the future. And also, we'll talk a little bit about Kai Kara-France KOing Steve Erceg. I did not see that one coming. I liked Erceg in that fight. And if Kara-France were to win that fight, I did not see it happening the way it did. Also, I have to spend a little time later talking about Dan Hooker's gut check victory over Mateusz Gamrot. That was the fight of the night. It was a very fun fight, a lot happening. And as Dan Hooker said, you can't replace heart. That was really something else. But to me, the big story of UFC 305, sadly, was the incompetent judging in the Jairzinho Rozenstruik-Tai Tuivasa heavyweight fight. Rozenstruik dominated that fight. I had it 30-27, and there were a lot of fights, including the main event. You know, I could have seen in the main event having DDP up 3-0 or Izzy up 3-0 or 2-1 either way after 3 completed rounds, because those rounds were all that close. I happen to have it 2-1 for DDP after 3, and I thought the momentum was all on Izzy's side. But however you had it, that was a close fight, and you could see it going a number of different ways. That was not the case in the Tuivasa-Rozenstruik fight. That was not the case in any round. And yet, 2 judges, 2, not just 1, gave the first round to Tai Tuivasa. Now, I am not the hugest believer in punch stats and fight stats to, say how a fight should be scored. But in this case, this was just a slugfest. This was 2 big guys standing in front of each other in kickboxing. There wasn't any slick moves. There wasn't any submissions. There wasn't any wrestling. It was big punches, knockout punches being thrown at each other. And in this case, then, the punch stats make a big difference. When we look at the total in the fight, Rozenstruik lands 91 significant strikes to 37 for Tai Tuivasa. In the first round, Rozenstruik lands 19 of 48 significant strikes compared to 9 of 38 for Tuivasa. And yet we had 2 of the judges give the first round to Tai Tuivasa. You may have seen my tweet, and later it was announced on the broadcast that they pulled Howie Booth from the co-main event. Howie Booth scored Rozenstruik-Tuivasa 3-0, 30-27 for Tai Tuivasa. Arguably the worst scorecard in the modern era of MMA, not just even in the UFC. That was horrendous. But Charlie Keech is escaping a little bit of heat here, and he scored the first round for Tuivasa. Absolutely incredible. Incredible that he could have done that. There is no way on earth that Tuivasa won the first round. There is no way on earth that he has won any round in that fight. Now, I often side with the judges, and a lot of the fans tend to be conspiracy theorists, and they think there's things going on that, the UFC wants a certain outcome, or the judge had, a bet on the fight, or he's, there's something untoward. People always are thinking that way. And I almost never think that way. But I have to admit that I'm thinking that way this morning after watching that fight and then seeing those scorecards turned in. I have no proof, evidence other than the utter incompetence of turning in a scorecard saying that Tai Tuivasa won that fight 3-0. or even turning in a scorecard that said Rozenstruik won the fight 2-1. It was 3-0, and it was not even close. So how do we rectify this? You know, the Australian Commission did a good job because they pulled Howie Booth from the co-main event. He was supposed to work the Cara France Erceg fight in the co-main event. His card was so egregious they pulled him from that, and they put Ben Cartledge in place of him. Good move there. But I don't think we can just forget about this and move on. I think these scorecards, the first round that Keech scored for Tuiavasa and the 3 rounds that Booth scored for Tuiavasa have to be investigated. If they both made mistakes, so be it. But I think we have to have as an investigation, and in public preferably, where the public can see this and can see what is being done. But at the very least, where the results are made public, because the integrity of the sport is at issue here. And this is a very, very difficult sport to judge. I have no doubt about that. And I've been on the wrong side of a lot of scorecards. There's no doubt about that. But that was not a difficult fight to score. And if you're a professional judge that's good enough to be working a UFC fight, and in Booth's case to be working the co-main event, you have to explain yourself how you could have possibly seen Tai Tuivasa winning that fight. That was an absolute and utter joke. And so I want to know, what did Booth do? Who does Booth know? Why did he score the fight that way? You know, if it was a mistake on his part and he was rooting for, not rooting for, but favoring the hometown hero because of the crowd, every time that Tuivasa even flinched to throw a punch, the crowd went crazy. He is so beloved there. And, maybe that was just it. He got caught up in the emotion of the crowd and made a bad score. But we need to know what happened, because that is unacceptable. And you cannot have that level of incompetence in the sport. And I don't think that these commissions are appointing judges that are that incompetent. And so that really, really, really demands an investigation. I mean, I kept wondering, does this guy have a bet on Tuivasa? That I hate to say that, because that is terrible, and of course there's no proof that that's the case. But I think the public needs to hear why those 2 judges scored the fight the way they did. Thankfully, Jairzinho Rozenstruik got the win. He performed very well in that fight, and it was a big win in his career. And thankfully, he got his arm raised, and we're not talking about him getting robbed out of a victory. Thank God for that. But it should have been a 30-27 win on all 3 cards. And it is outrageous to think that these 2 judges scored the fight the way they did. So let's have a very public investigation, and let's release the results of that investigation so everybody knows, all cards are turned over on the table, and everybody knows what went on. And if it was just incompetence or a bad night, then we move forward. But if there was something untoward going on, then that needs to be dealt with as well. So enough with that. Let's move on. In the main event, Dricus du Plessis showed why he is the champion. He won for the 3rd time in a row over a current or former UFC champion. Going back to UFC 290, he defeated Robert Whittaker in Las Vegas. In January, he lifted the title from Sean Strickland in Toronto. And then on Saturday, I thought in a really memorable performance, he came and defeated Israel Adesanya in a fight that I thought all the momentum was going Adesanya's way. Adesanya was hurting him with body shots, especially as the fight wore on. In the 3rd round and then in the 4th round, Adesanya was landing a lot of really good body shots, both punches and kicks. And you could see du Plessis kind of melting, and it looked like Adesanya was going to stop him, or at the very least kind of sweep those last couple of rounds and win a decision in that fight. And you got to give du Plessis a lot of credit, because that is not hard to do, to change momentum against arguably the best striker in the UFC. I say arguably, Sean O'Malley's a great striker. There are a lot of other great strikers, and Carlos Prates may be one of them, and we'll talk about him later. He may be joining that list sometime down the road. He has a lot to prove, but you know what I'm saying. I'm just trying to point out there's a lot of great strikers. Adesanya certainly among them. And du Plessis turned that fight around. That shows a lot of heart on his part. This guy is a legit world-class star right now. It's going to be interesting to see where the various sites rank him pound for pound. I don't know that he has gotten the love for his skills that he really deserves, but boy, he is impressive, and that was an impressive victory. Speaking of impressive victories, I think Dan Hooker's win over Mateusz Gamrot was also very impressive. You know, I will admit there, I had that one handicapped all wrong. I really thought Gamrot, you know, would go out there, and my sense was going into the fight that it would be, you know, maybe a slight edge in striking to Hooker to even, and then Gamrot's wrestling would take over, and that I figured he would maul Hooker on the ground. But Hooker had tremendous takedown defense. He really improved, and I thought he looked fantastic in that fight. And he probably is going to end up in the top 5, certainly in the top 10. Gamrot was number 5, so you have to think that Hooker is going to jump way up when the new rankings come out. Does he jump all the way up from, I believe he was 12? Does he jump all the way up from there into the top 5? You know, I don't know. That's a big leap, and he's going to be jumping over a lot of really good fighters in his wake there. So I don't know where he belongs right now, but I think Dan Hooker reinvigorated his career, and you can see some big fights coming up for Dan Hooker. I doubt he gets Conor McGregor like he called for after the fight, but I think there's going to be some really good fights in the path for Dan Hooker. For Kai Kara-France, that was a very impressive win over Steve Erceg, too. Erceg was coming off a loss at UFC 301 to Alexander Pantoja in a title fight, and a lot of people thought he won that fight. Erceg had been very impressive in the UFC and went into that fight yesterday as a fairly significant favorite. But Kara-France looked really good, and I thought he put everything together, and that was another impressive performance by yet another member of the city kickboxing team in New Zealand. I give them a lot of credit because they had their guys ready. Adesanya, Kara-France, Dan Hooker, they all came from that team, and they all performed admirably. So I think we're going to see Kara-France in another big fight. Do we see Kai Kara-France in a rematch against Brandon Moreno? Moreno, I think I mentioned on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, but I ran into Brandon Moreno about a week or so ago at Costco here in Las Vegas, and he said that he is going to come back and fight. Said he probably wanted to fight in the fall, maybe in New York. He's dealing with a hand injury at the time I spoke to him like a week or 10 days ago, and so he wasn't sure if he would make it back then. But I think that would be an interesting fight if that was one that they decided to make. So let's keep an eye out on what happens with Kai Kara-France. And then finally, Carlos Prates. I mean, boy, he knocks out Li Jingliang, just was battering him with strikes. I mean, oh my, was that impressive. Dropped him to the seat of his pants, I don't know how many times with that straight left hand. And then he kind of throws a little bit of a cross and drops him and knocked him out. And I love the cool by Prates. He just kind of walks away when he landed the shot, didn't go for the ground and pound because he knew he did not need it. And that is going to be a very good fight. He called out Chaos Williams afterwards. I think that's a good call out. That'll be a fun fight to see. But this is a guy I think is looking like a future star. You know, you don't want to get ahead of yourself on guys that are early in their UFC careers and get all excited over one performance. But Li Jingliang is no joke, and nobody had ever knocked him out before. And boy, did Prates look extremely good in that performance. So good for him, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more of him. I hope you enjoyed the card last night. I thought it was really a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it a tremendous amount. We will be talking to you guys soon. I will be covering the Dana White Contender Series, week 2 of season 8, upcoming on Tuesday, August 20th. So look for my coverage on KevinIole.com. I appreciate all of you guys following me. I appreciate your thoughts and comments. And if you could, please like and share not only this video, but all subscribe to my channel. It really, really helps. And I've got a lot of really cool things coming in the future. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate y'all. We will talk to y'all soon.